Of the Holocaust, Martin Sherwin has written, "In the past, governments have planned and carried out unthinkable atrocities against enemies, but never before had a modern, civilized Western society amassed its bureaucratic, military, technological, and cultural resources to systematically disempower, degrade, torture, and eradicate an entire people, both within and beyond its own borders. At its most intense moments during the autumn of 1941 and again during the summer and autumn of 1942, many thousands of Jews were killed every day. They perished in extermination camps, at execution sites, ghettos, slave labor camps, and on death marches. Through the records of the Holocaust, we witness the results of prejudice and hate, of pride and of abuse of power. And on occasion, from the righteous among the nations, we also were fortunate to witness love and involvement, commitment and concern from those who opposed the crimes of the Nazi regime. The testimony of those who survived constitutes the main record of what was done to the Jews during those years. The murderers, with pride and arrogance, often kept records, even copious records. But the victims, the 6 million who were killed, left no record except for a few fragments in diaries, a few letters, a few scribbled messages. But in the main, others must bear witness to what was done to the millions who could never tell their story. There are so few years and so few voices left to give first-hand witness of the Holocaust tonight. But we're pleased to have Mr. Al Wiener, who was born in Portland. That's up too high, by the way, whoever's controlling it. We're fortunate to have Mr. Al Wiener, who was born in Portland, Poland, obviously. Oh boy. Things are combined against me. If they'd open that pit up, I'd jump right in. In his youth, he had to identify his father, who was shot by the Germans. He endured 5 camps and came out of them, like all did, a wisp of a person, but alive. We hope his memories and insights and experience will help give us wisdom, will sharpen our consciences and our moral sensitivities, and encourage us to resist evil. Perhaps if we learn well, we may even be able to resist evil in time. Mr. Al Wiener.
I'm sure that all of you are familiar with the Holocaust. Maybe you saw the Schindler's List, or that Life is Beautiful, or Saving Private Ryan. But here you have a chance to see somebody who really went through all this. As you all know, we are getting older, and within the next 10 years, 15 years, nobody of the survivors is going to be to tell you this story. As a matter of fact, every day now, 130 survivors die, and every day, 1,000 American World War II veterans die. So I feel it's my duty and obligation to share with you my experience, because there's a silver lining in any situation. And if you can derive any benefit from it, I'm going to feel rewarded. So far, I have at home about 300 letters received from students and teachers alike that really encourage me to come and to talk to you. Now I'll tell you about myself. I come from a little town in Poland called Chrzanów, which is not far from the same town that the Pope John II comes from. I was brought up in a very religious home, and we had a very good life. We didn't have those conveniences that you have today, like washers or blenders, or television or radio. We didn't even have plumbing. We didn't have any of these conveniences that you take for granted today. However, we had a beautiful life. There was a lot of love. The warmth in our house and the values instilled in me as a child, to a certain extent, kept me alive during all those bitter years in concentration camps. As a child, I went to school, to the public school in the hours in the morning. In the afternoon, I went to a religious school to get my religious training. So we really learned. Now everything came to an end on September 1, 1939, when the German army invaded Poland. And as you all know, Poland's army was no match for the German might. And the town Chrzanów was very close to the German border. So we were very affected quite early, the beginning of the war. And people suggested to us to try to flee, to move to deeper into Poland. Maybe we should be able to avoid the invasion. So we did. My stepmother, my older brother, and my younger brother, we managed to escape about 50 miles. Right? Our father didn't join us for the simple reason that he had a big store, and the Polish retreating army asked him to stay and provide them with those provisions. But we, my stepmother and my older brother, myself, did manage to flee those 50 miles, but the German caught up with us. So actually we didn't gain anything by running away. After 3 months later, after everything more or less settled and you could move, so we did go back to Poland, to our town Chrzanów, and we realized that our father is not around. We asked people, nobody wanted to tell us his whereabouts. People didn't know. So for 3 months we wondered what happened to our father. One day they came to us from the community, and they said to us, well, there is a pit not far from here, about 5 miles, and there are people buried over there. If you want to know whether your father is one of those victims, you have to give so much and so much money, and you come with us the following morning. So the following morning, that's what we did. My stepmother, my older brother, and myself went to that site where the pit was, and we started to dig out those bodies. Now, if you know, somebody is buried after 3 months, he is partially decomposed. It's not so easy to identify. However, my stepmother did recognize my father's body by the certain items that he had in his pockets. Now, I don't have to tell you what kind of traumatic experience this is. When you are only 13 years old, this was my age when I saw my partially decomposed body of my father. This was a pit of 37 people. Now the way they were killed is just unbelievable. They just picked up at random 38 people. One of them managed to escape during the night. He pretended to be dead, and he managed to roll over the gate, and he survived this way. But the 37 people who were identified and were brought the following day to burial, just that to stay there and to see, it took a long time. We didn't have this equipment that we have today. And besides that, they were thrown into that pit. They were not even put in a normal fashion. Complete disregard for human life. And the way my father was killed, they didn't shot them in order to die instantly. They shot them, let them to bleed until they expired. A Pole who passed by that place where those bodies were lying, and he knew my father, he approached me and asked him, Mr. Wiener, is there anything I can do for you? Can I help you? So he said, no, God gave my soul and God takes my soul. He was a very genuinely believing person. And maybe these last moments of his life were easier for him than for somebody who is not a believer, who has no faith. Now, when we brought these 37 caskets to the burial in the Jewish cemetery in that channel, it took a long time to dig a mass grave, because all of a sudden there are so many new orphans and widows. I have a picture here about the monument erected after the war for those 37 people. And it's interesting that the 38 persons who managed to escape, later on when I mentioned the concentration camp, I met him in one of the concentration camps. And he was very good to me. I was lonely, I was a very young kid, he was much older, and he was like my father. And one day he told me, I feel like being your father, because I was lying right next to him while he was dying. Now the reason that I bring this up, it just tells you how much we suffered as children when we did because of the war, the way they treated us, and for no other reason, just because we were what we were Jewish. Now in 1942, from 1939 to 1942, life was more or less, it wasn't good, because every day we had restrictions. We couldn't walk here, we couldn't live here, we couldn't eat this, we couldn't eat that. But there was no mass liquidation as it was in later years, in 1942. In 1941, in the middle of the night, they knocked at our door and they took my older brother to a labor camp. Now once they took you to labor camp, you had no more contact with anybody. So this was a blow to the family. A year later, 1942, they knocked at the door and they picked me up. They didn't ask me my age, they just looked at me and they noticed that I'm tall enough or strong enough for their purpose. They took me, they let me take a few items, and here I went to the concentration camp. My first camp was Blechhammer, which is in Germany. What the Germans did over there in that Blechhammer, out of the forest, they cut off a certain area and they built a tremendous refinery. And for that purpose, they enslaved thousands and thousands of people. Now, when we marched to work every day, we noticed other groups. In that same Blechhammer, there were about 40 different nationalities. There were Russian prisoners of war, there were German deserters, Poles, Yugoslavians, 40 different nationalities. So we were not the only ones who suffered. But the fact is that life in those camps was so bitter. I can tell you that coming to work, from work, people were dying left and right. First of all, we didn't have enough food. And the worst part of it, we were beaten. My body is full of scars to this very day, from those days. But there's one episode which I would like to mention about Blechhammer. One day, as I mentioned, at the working place, we did meet with other nationalities. So a Pole approached me, he noticed that I had a watch. He said to me, if you give me your watch, I'll give you a loaf of bread. Now, a loaf of bread at that time might be a lifesaver. And I was naive, and I told him, okay, I'll give you the watch. He promised to give me that loaf of bread, but he never gave it to me. But what did happen when we came back to our camp after a day of work, there was an appeal. Everybody was called into the center of the camp. And the commander said these words: something happened today at the working place, an infraction of our rules. Somebody offered a watch for a loaf of bread. If this man doesn't step forward and admit what he did, you are all going to be punished collectively. You are going to stay here during the entire night, and tomorrow morning you are going to go to work. I don't know where I took the courage But this is one of the values, the way we were brought up at home, that you are responsible for your deed. I did step forward, and I said, yes, this was me. Now everybody else was discharged, could go back to the barracks, and my punishment was, they took me into a special room, and they whipped me 15 times. And many a times, once you are whipped, you'd have no chances to survive. Somehow I did. And what I didn't mention before, when I did reach Blechhammer, I met over there my brother. This was very unusual, but I did meet him, and when I came to the Blechhammer, he had a mixed feeling. On one hand, he was happy that we are going to be together, but on the other hand, he realized that I'm so young. How am I going to endure all those terrible conditions? So when I came out from the place where I was beaten, hit those 15 whips, my brother was standing there and was crying. He was sure that I'm not going to endure those beatings. This is just one example of the brutality. We had a commander that he was a sadist. He just enjoyed torturing us. His ideas, like taking us in the middle of the night and giving us a cold shower, or taking away from us those meager portion of bread, or just to chase us out and to beat us. And later on we found out, after the war, that same man who was the commander of that camp, he was a criminal. This was the system of the Germans. They just took criminals, common criminals, and they appointed them to be those commanders of those camps. So you can imagine what kind of character they had. They vent out all their anger or frustrations in their own lives on us. In that Blechhammer, I was from June till October 1942. And one day they decided that they are going to ship me some other place. And they separated between me and my brother. They didn't ask name. They just called my number, 64735, and that's it. They separated us. And since then, I didn't see my brother again. And they sent me to a camp, Brande, which is also a part of Germany. From October to December, I was there only 2 months, and I doubted very much if I would be able to survive longer, because the conditions over there were so bad. We had to walk to work every day, 10 miles each direction. And it was very cold. We had hardly have anything to wear. And the worst part of it, that our shoes were made out of a wood sole and a fabric. And when you walk on snow, you cannot walk. So when you fall, the guards hit you or kill you. There was no value to human life. I was there for 2 months, and it really was a bitter time. From there, I was sent to another camp, which was Grossmasterwitz. When I say sent to another camp, I have a picture here in what condition they transferred us from one to the other in Kettelwagen. Now, a Kettelwagen, there is nothing to eat and nothing to drink, no sanitary arrangement, and you don't even have room to sit down or to fall down. We were standing for a day and a half. Now, in Grossmasterwitz it was a little bit easier in this respect that we didn't have to walk so many miles. We were in the same vicinity, and it was quite interesting the kind of work we did. The Germans, as we all know, were very efficient, and everything was picked up at the front lines, like uniforms of dead soldiers, German or Russians, or any equipment or any personal belonging. It came to that Grossmasterwitz. Our duty was to assort it, to clean it, and then to reship it. And now there's one episode in that Grossmasterwitz that I would like to mention. It gave me a lesson of life about tolerance, and maybe you can learn from it too. At one point, the Germans decided to convert a textile factory into an ammunition factory. And for that purpose, they they asked us to dismantle a part of the factory, while at the same time, at the other part of the factory, German women who worked over there for generations continued to operate their machinery. But there were signs all over telling those German women, don't look at the prisoners, don't have any contact with them, because if you do, you risk your own life. You are doomed, in the German language. Now one day, while I was dismantling a machine, a woman passed by public, she went to her restroom, and she pointed to me, she hinted to a certain spot. I didn't know initially what she meant by it, but out of curiosity, I went to that spot, and I found under the crate a sandwich. Now, you have to remember, she risked her own life for a complete stranger, and she repeated that noble act 30 days, as long as I worked over there. After the war, I went to that locality. I was prompted to reward her. I wanted so much to pay my debt, because she really endangered her life for me, for a complete stranger. And obviously, I didn't know her name. I could hardly remember her face. But nothing kept me back. I felt that I owed something to that woman. Unfortunately, if you don't know the name, if you don't know the address, how can you locate somebody? But that is the way I brought up my children. I always used to tell them, I cannot make any generalization about any group. If somebody asked me, how come you don't hate all the Germans? So I always tell them, how can I hate all the Germans, that here was one woman that endangered her life for me. And I will never forget that woman. For years, this was my dream, that I would be able to locate her. From Grossmarktowitz, I was sent to another camp, also at Klettendorf. Very, very hard work. We built the Autobahnstraße of Germany. I don't know if you're familiar about that. They planned to build a highway with 8 or 12 lanes across all the conquered countries in Europe. And this is the camp, the first time that I came across with people from Western Europe, like the Benelux countries, Belgium, Holland, Luxembourg. These were people who were much better off, better educated. They suffered less anti-Semitism or persecution as the Eastern European Jewry. And they really couldn't take all this humiliation. I'll never forget that case when at one point I was building trenches for the Germans, and that Jewish man, a young man from Belgium, he noticed that I picked up a raw potato. A farmer left a raw potato. I picked up the potato, as dirty as it was. I couldn't wash it, I couldn't peel it, I couldn't cook it, obviously, and I ate it raw. When you are hungry, I'm sure that everybody once in a while has punks of hunger, but when you starve day after day, that's what you do. And he tells me, how can you eat a potato like that? How can you take all this humiliation altogether? I can. Because just a week ago I was in my home and I had everything what I needed in my life. I cannot do it. I'm going to die very soon. And he did. He did die after a while. I told him then, look, if you would have my experience of camp life for such a long time as I have, you would probably do the same. You would eat the raw potato. But not everybody can take this humiliation. One of the reasons that I did strive to survive, because when people ask me, how did you survive? I don't have a clear answer. I really don't. There are many episodes that it's hard to explain. But one of the things is that I did want to survive is to meet somebody from my family, to meet my brother again, hope. I don't know if you have a chance to read the book, which is called All But My Life. It is about a girl, more or less my age, She was in concentration camp. In her book, all she does is she writes about the love of her family and her suffering in concentration camp. And she was willing to suffer as long as was their hope that she will ever meet her brother and her parents. Now this girl, her name is Greta Klein, she survived there in Belgium and married an American soldier who liberated her. And she's still alive. She's now about 78 years old. If you ever go to the museum, the Holocaust Museum in Washington, you can see her speeches and her entire domineer. Anyway, she and her husband, both of them, go around the country and they have the message of tolerance and love. Now from that camp, they sent me to another camp, which is Waldenburg. In that camp, I stayed till the day of liberation, which was May the 9th. And talking about fate, the German system was that as long as they can utilize your strength, your work, you do serve their purpose. But once you are so deteriorated and so weak that they cannot use you anymore, they just liquidate you. So, in February 1945, I was so weak, I couldn't go to work anymore. So they destined me to be sent to Gross Rosen, which over there there's a crematorium, and they took me to that place. They gave me a piece of soap and a towel to deceive me that I'm going to be taking a shower. But basically what it was, these were showers of gas. And while I was standing in the line, a German entrepreneur, he called me in German, he says, "Komm raus, Knabe, du kannst doch bei der Arbeit kapieren. Get out, you young man. You can expire at work. We can still use you." And that is the way, incidentally, that I passed that moment, and he sent me back to that Wallenburg, where I stayed there in Wallenburg till May the 9th, 1945. We didn't know anything that the war was going to come to an end. We were completely isolated. We had no means of communication or information. And that Wallenburg, at the beginning when we came there, they stripped us of everything personal. They just gave us a uniform which has no pockets in it. In other words, you are not supposed to have even a handkerchief. You are not human. I have a picture here, how I looked in that uniform, how I looked when I was liberated in 1945. My total weight was 80 pounds. 80 pounds. So you can imagine what kind of condition I was. And that May the 9th, 1945, the formal capitulation of Germany was May the 8th, 1945. So one day after the capitulation, we were still assembled in the center of the camp to go to work like any other day. But the guards who were supposed to escort us to work didn't show up. We wondered what happened. About 12 o'clock in the afternoon, one of the guards did show up, and they threw in the keys of the main gate. And he gave it to the Judenältester, the one we always had somebody, a liaison between the authorities and the prisoners. And about an hour later, a Russian tank came straight on the fence, and he said to us, "You are liberated. You are liberated. Go to the town of Waldenburg, kill, murder, rape, rob, take vengeance. We understand you. We lost 20 million of our own people. Take vengeance, at least for 3 days." I was too weak to go, and if I would be healthy, I wouldn't have done it, because I was ingrained as a child to love and not to hate. With all my bitterness and with all my suffering, when I say suffering, I figured it out at one point that 123 people of my extended family, not immediate family, they all perished. My stepmother and my youngest brother, who was 7 years old, were sent to Auschwitz, where he perished. My older brother, that I was with him, that Blechem at the beginning that I told you, he was in a concentration camp, and then he couldn't make it. I didn't know what happened to him for a long, long time, and something very unusually happened. In New York City, somebody told me, somebody who knew me from my little town, and he said to me, I'm going to tell you something which you might like or may dislike, but at least you know the truth. Your brother was so deteriorated that they sent him to Auschwitz from a labor camp. And I'm the one that shoveled him into the crematorium. Because the Germans didn't do the dirty work. They just gassed the people, and later on somebody has to push them into the organ. And he said, I did it with my own hands. I recognized him. So since then I know where he perished. You have to remember that most of the people who perished, they don't have a grave. Some people say they envy me that at least my father has a grave. If I want to visit him, I can still go to Poland to visit him. But most of our people don't have graves. Now ask me why. I have just questions, I don't have the answer. Why did they take me to concentration camp? Why did they beat me? Why did they knock out my teeth? I have no answers. But I don't hate. I'm willing to forgive somebody who really hurt me. I mentioned that before, that a very good, interesting book is called The Sunflower. The Sunflower was written by Simon Wiesenthal. And this is his story. When he was in concentration camp, at one point, his job was to clean a hospital. And in that hospital, on one bed, there was a German officer, Nazi, dying. And he called to that Jew, he told him, come here, I want to make a confession to you. I killed so many innocent women, children, and men. And I want to ask you to forgive me. I want to die in peace. So Simon Wiesenthal couldn't make up his mind. On one hand, he would be willing to forgive that officer. On the other hand, how could he? He had no right to talk on the behalf of all those people who are not here anymore. And in that book, Simon Wiesenthal is asking 53 prominent people all over the world, clergymen, philosophers, sociologists, politicians, how could you have acted in this kind of situation? Would you be willing to forgive? And their answer is so different. No two people have the same answer. They all have difficulties to come to a decision. And this is incorporated into a part of that book. Those 53 answers, including the Dalai Lama, who is going to be here, by the way, next month in the state of Oregon. Now, what I wanted mainly, when I do speak to the high school kids on churches, in this situation that my experience with all my suffering, when I was liberated out, I thought maybe there's going to be a better world order. I suffered so much, I paid such a high price, maybe there's going to be a better world. Unfortunately, many events took place since then, like in Biafra or Somalia, or in the Middle East, or in Kosovo. And this discouraged me to a certain extent, because I thought when we were liberated that there's going to be no more suffering, no more tormentors. But unfortunately there is. But still there's a big difference. I remember a few years ago when I went to a commemoration, like the commemoration here in New York City, when I came out, a TV crew approached me and they asked me, are you a survivor? I told them yes. So how do you relate to the events in Kosovo? So I told them, I feel very bad about it, that there is still so much cruelty in this world. But there's a big difference. When I was in a concentration camp, I felt completely abandoned by the world community. Here, at least today, there's somebody cares. Is it the United Nations? Is it the United States? Somebody cares. We felt completely abandoned. And this was the worst part of it. Now, when we are talking, when I come to a class like here or whatever, and I see or read in the paper that 1 out of 4 kids drops out of school, it pains me. I tell them, look, I would like to go to school. At the age of 13, I had to stop schooling. My school years were spent in concentration camps. You have a chance, you are privileged to have a normal life, to go to school, to acquire knowledge. Don't miss it. Because this is what you know, this is the real possession of man. I can give you hundreds of examples. Even my father, he had everything what he needed according to the standard of living of those days. And one day, everything was taken away, and his life. So, or another example, what happened recently in India. There was an earthquake. Thousands of people were killed. Thousands of people survived. But everything what they had, all their belongings were gone. That knowledge, education, nobody can take it away from you. It stays with you. You see, my formal education is only 5 classes of elementary school. Because the war broke out, you cannot go to school anymore. But then, when you have the values instilled in me as a child, I've never seen my father idle for a minute. And this I remember very well, that I have to learn. So I made an effort to educate myself. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to sign my name. But for kids who have a normal life today, and they drop out from school, to me it is a pity. The other thing is, it is about tolerance, and I gave you a very good example. And that is the way I try to bring up my children. I remember that at one point, I had a friend that he had some grievances against his boss who happened to be Jewish. So he told me rather, he said, I wish Hitler would kill all the Jews. So I told him, Herbert, have you read the Mein Kampf, Hitler's philosophy, Hitler's book? Hitler just started with the Jews. There is a very good saying by Elie Wiesel. He says that every Jew was a victim, but not all the victims were only Jews. There are many people. I just mentioned before, 20 million Russians were killed during the war. And if God forbid, if Hitler would have his way, who knows what would have happened? They had a dream. They used to march on the street and had one song. Heute Deutschland, morgen über alles. Today Germany, but tomorrow we should be everywhere. This is what they were striving for. But fortunately enough, when the Americans and the French and the British and the Russians decided to fight Hitler, and that's when he was defeated. When I was in Großmasterwitz, in that camp, and we helped to build their might. So we came to one conclusion, that nobody in this world is ever going to defeat the Germans. They were so strong, they were so efficient, but fortunately it turned out that they were defeated. Now, I don't know if my time is up, but if you have any questions, I'll be more than glad to hear them. Is my time up?
No.
So you want to continue? Huh?
No. I'm just going to help with this question. You would like to ask any questions?
First of all, I did go home to my hometown and see if anybody from my family did survive. And unfortunately, I stayed there only for a few weeks. I went to my apartment, and somebody else occupied my apartment, and they didn't even let me in. And it was not easy. If you have no profession, you have no skills, where do you go? How do you survive? It was very, very tough. And there were at the beginning, like the UNRWA, if you remember, there were some organizations that they tried to help those displaced people that are camps, like the British and the Americans. But I was liberated by the Russians, and they were not equipped for this. They just didn't have the means to support us, so we were on our own, and it was a very, very tough time, but at least we were free. I remember from not only just for months, maybe for years, I used to walk in the street and look behind me, and I couldn't realize that there was nobody guarding me. There was always somebody has to guard me, somebody has to hit me. It was not easy till eventually, and that's the reason I'm so grateful to the United States that at least here I did have a chance. I went to college in the evenings. I tried to catch up those years that I couldn't learn, and it wasn't easy because I had a family to support, 2 small children. But eventually, I'm here, and it worked out. I can tell you when I was liberated, and I have a picture how I looked when I was liberated, 80 pounds. And there were 8 Russian doctors who felt sorry for me. They looked at me like a paradigm, and they said, "Sorry, young man, but you cannot live more than 2 years." They made a mistake. All those doctors probably by now must be dead. I'm still here. But this is a fact. Whatever I ate, I just gave it back. I couldn't digest anything. My body couldn't assimilate anything. And for years I used to go to doctor, all kinds of things. I was a young, sickly man. And there are many things to this very day. For example, I don't have any teeth. Whatever I have, these are dentures. Most of my teeth were knocked out. Ask me why? No answer. Somebody felt like hitting me and let me become unconscious for no good reason. Till this very day, I have nightmares. This episode I told you about my father lying when I saw his partially decomposed body. This haunts me day and night. I can go to a fun affair, to a wedding, and this penetrates into my mind. Those terrible scenes. You don't forget those things. You live with this. It lives within you. It's very hard to understand, to comprehend for somebody who didn't go through that. I remember one day I watched a documentary about an American young lady, had a son, a doctor. She took him to Auschwitz, where she used to be incarcerated. And she just wanted her son to be aware where she suffered so much. And my youngest son came and he noticed that I'm watching that documentary. And what did he see? He saw piles of shoes, piles of hair. And he says to me, "Dad, was it really so bad?" What did he see? He just saw traces. But the real suffering is just unthinkable. Nobody can comprehend. And I don't. I asked myself many times, how did I endure all that hardship? There's only one time that I dared to contemplate suicide. And I was so close. All I had to do is to touch that electrified fence and I finished with my suffering. Somehow, either being a coward, either because of my moral and religious upbringing, I just couldn't do it. But it was very, very bitter. And I don't hate German people as a whole, especially today's generation. But it's not their fault what their ancestors did. And if I get my pension, I'm getting for my labor, I'm getting $500 a month. This doesn't bring my family back. Very simple. I registered with the consulate to come here. I waited for many years to get a visa. or a permit to emigrate to the United States, like anybody else. But I'm grateful to the United States for the freedom and for the opportunity. And I just wish that the kids that are being brought up here and have a normal life, that they appreciate and they don't take everything for granted.
Can you tell us something about your marriage and what age you were?
Well, I did get married at the age of 25, and this is, by the way, a very good question. All those years, since the liberation, till I got married, I always wondered, does it pay for me to start a new life? Because, you see, it is a privilege to survive. But on the other hand, it's such a burden. I used to ask my questions all the time. Why did I survive and my brother didn't survive? Why did I survive and all the others did not survive? It is not easy. You have qualms of conscience. It bothers you all the time. So it's not my wife that she is the one that was anxious, or she fell in love, whatever. And she's the one that pushed me into it to get married. Maybe I wouldn't have. I just was not in the mood to start a new life because I was just haunted by that Holocaust period. And then, don't forget, I had such an inferiority complex. She was educated, she had a college degree, and who am I? I had no education. This made me feel very, very bad in comparison to her or to all the others who had a normal life. And that's the reason when you, between the age of 13, you stop going to school. You really don't know much, but you have to make an effort later years in order to catch up what you lost. And that's not easy, especially if you have to support the family. If I practice my faith, I still have faith. Absolutely I have faith. When you say that, it is, there are mysterious ways, God's mysterious ways. I'll never forget when I was standing at that line, I mentioned it before, when they told me, they gave me a piece of soap and a towel to deceive me, that I'm going to take a shower, but basically what they wanted is to liquidate me. And to be honest, I didn't realize that those chimneys are human beings being burned. But there was somebody in front of me, an older person, and he said in the Hebrew language, which I didn't understand, he said, Ayech Elohim. He asked, where are you, God? He asked that question because he understood and he wondered why do we deserve to be liquidated in such a brutal way. But I don't have all the answers. Of course, I'm skeptical sometimes, but you have to understand. But I do believe in divine, yes.
And she may have further wondered if you still observe Judaism.
Yes, I do observe Judaism, especially traditionally, absolutely yes. Because there are so many values instilled in me as a child, which is so beautiful. It enriches my life. And when my children were small, I did send them to a parochial school. And then later on, they decide what kind of life they want to lead. What do I do for a living? I came in 1960, and as I mentioned, I went in the evenings. I worked a day in the evening. I went to college. I learned accounting. I became an accountant. And that's the way how I made a living. I made people pay taxes. Well, I just moved to this area 1 year ago. In New York City, there are many survivors still. But as I mentioned before, we are dwindling. We are dying. Very rapidly. I'm one of the youngest, and I'm 74 years old. Now, when we came to this country in those days, yes, we had organizations, we came together, we helped each other. We had that commemoration in Temple Emmanuel every year for the last 37 years. The attendance is at least 6,000 people. We do commemorate, we live it out with our past. And what is so remarkable about those survivors, and many of us, that they accomplished so much despite all the difficulties in their young age. They studied, they succeeded in business, they became involved in social activities. Take, for example, the one who started Intel, that Andrew Grohl. He's a survivor. And look, he started the chip business. So you have to give him credit. And I attribute those things to the values that were instilled in us when we were children. I remember that my father used to say, study, study, study. It's the same thing what Lenin said to the students when they came to ask him, how can we help the revolution? I don't remember seeing my father 1 minute idle. We tried to emulate him. He was a model. Besides, that he was the king of the house. We were very disciplined as children. And I do feel sometimes, retrospectively, that those values instilled in me as a child, to a certain extent, kept me alive. Because if you strive for something, it's interesting that they found out that among the survivors, those who had families and hoped that somebody in the family somehow survived, they endured it easier than all the others who just didn't care. They had nobody to yell for.
Question here. Are you frightened of things? Did you have fear after your release and as you've lived here?
It's a very timely question. I still have that lack of security. And I always wonder why. I still have nightmares, I told you. It comes back to me all the time. It just penetrates me wherever I am. And I'm a very insecure person. Yes, I admit, I'm very insecure. Sometimes it's not rational, because I can say to myself, I have a family, I can make a living, I'm free, but irrational. It has to do with all those suffering in those years when you are young. But I do appreciate very much those values that were instilled in me. And it's again, it's the personal responsibility, it's respect for your parents, respect for your school. If you have respect for your parents and you have respect for your school, for your teacher, then you have respect for society as a whole.
Question.
That's what I've been trying to do. That's why I'm here.
I'll say it from here, so it goes to the class from here. She was wondering that she knows people, even here at college, who seem to know nothing of Auschwitz or the Holocaust, and wondered how he felt about that. His response is that's why he's here. Anything else?
The reason that I'm here, and the last few months I gave lectures in many places, and I went, for example, to Sweet Home, to a school, and they didn't even see Schindler's List. They don't know anything about it. And you have to enlighten them, because there is a message. There's a silver lining, and there's a message in my experience. And it would be very sad if somebody comes to me and says, hey, the Holocaust didn't exist, or didn't happen. And there are, as you know, there are people who try to deny the Holocaust, which is very painful, and it's stupid too, because the events of the Holocaust, of World War II, are so well documented, thanks to photography and other technology. And you go to the museum, you see pictures taken by the German soldiers while they were committing those criminal acts. It is evidence. How can anybody come and it didn't happen? That is the reason that, and children do appreciate. I can tell you, I have 300 letters at home from children and teachers, and they say that I made a difference in their lives. First of all, they are going to appreciate more what they have. They're not going to take anything for granted. And if not everything else, they are going to be informed. So if somebody comes and tells you, hey, it didn't happen, it's exaggerated, or whatever. No, it happened. You cannot say that. I heard it from the horse's mouth, how it happened. So how can you say it didn't? And then you can go to a museum in Washington or in Los Angeles and see for yourself.